What's the most peeped up thing you've ever did/saw? I saw my little brother getting hit by a car and flying a few meters through the air when he was only 6 years old. Fortunately, he didn't even break a bone, but damn. I'll never forget this. Found a dead body on the sidewalk in front of my building on my third day living in NYC. When I told my supervisor about it at work, hoping to process it with someone, she just kind of brushed it off like welcome to New York. The most peeped up thing I've seen was a guy who had just been in a motorcycle accident bleeding out on the side of the freeway. He was clenching onto the hand of the girl who was the driver of the car involved. She was crying hysterically. I saw his hand turn white in a matter of seconds. I remember it whenever I see someone on a bike. Worked in a gas station in 80s. Some guy came in after midnight and bought a cigarette lighter. He walked outside and went over to one of the gas pumps and pumped gas all over himself. Set himself on fire after that. After I tripped the emergency shutoff for the pumps, me and another customer ran outside. The customer tried to put the fire out on the guy with his jacket, and I used a fire extinguisher on the other things that was on fire. Eventually we succeed, but the guy was seriously burned all over. This was the 80s, so most of his clothes was of synthetic fabric that had melted into his flesh. His face was kind of melted too. The ambulance came really quick and he was taken away. He didn't die, but I never saw him again. I talked to some cops a while later and they said that he was on probation and was protesting about his treatment and tried to commit suicide. Fatal hit and run vehicle accident that happened in front of me. A car got struck by someone who ran a red light. The truck at fault basically slowed down a second and then drove away. I stopped to check on the people in the car. It was a couple of teens. The guy having substantial leg injuries and the girl was unconscious and losing a lot of blood. Like, her pants, seat, and floor carpet were becoming saturated with it. She basically stopped breathing and lost her pulse before the ambulance got there. The guy was crying and begging for me to help her, though there wasn't much I could do. Once she was loaded on the ambulance, the guy started pacing around on his bad leg and basically having a panic attack. The ambulance crew and some firefighters were mostly busy with the girl, so me and one other firefighter were trying to calm the guy down. He finally collapsed in pain and another ambulance arrived to get him taken care of. I remember getting in my car to drive home, turning the radio off, having a what the peep just happened moment, then driving home in silence while trying to process it. Didn't get much sleep that night, obviously. I later learned that they never got her pulse back. She was either 15 or 16 years old. Don't remember exactly. I witnessed a bad car accident once. The car launched off of an overpass as I went under it. The car flipped several times. It was like something out of a movie. I was the first person on the scene. My wife called 911. It was not a pretty sight. The first thing I remember seeing was a severed arm beside the road. There wasn't much left of the person's body. I worked for a horse training ranch for a month when I was a kid. Me and the dude I worked with found a cow that had been dead for a while out in the field. It was bloated and gonna blow soon. We did not engage with the cow. We weren't prepared for a cleanup that day. When we came back prepared for cleaning the next day, it had ruptured and the smell was life-changing. It was spiritually bad. Since I was basically an unpaid intern, the paid guys told me to take a hike. 14-year-old me took a hike. I was a hard-working kid and they knew it, so let me off with that one. I tripped over a dead body in tall grass working an accident trying to find the missing passenger. It was 3 a.m. and raining. The photo evidence for a child baby murder case that they showed in court when I worked for the Department of Human Services. The parents wanted to retain custody of their older son, which is why they were involved with CPS. I was 22. There were just countless pages we had to look at while the expert witnesses explained what we were seeing. The images are burned into my brain forever and I'll never forget his name as long as I live. That poor baby. Watching a car traveling at about 130 miles per hour in my rear view mirror almost hit me, but instead hit the base of a bridge. The crunching sound, then bodies flying everywhere. Then total silence. My story seems pretty lame after reading some of these stories. I saw a guy get his hand eaten by the Gatling gun on an A-10 aircraft in 1981. He had his hand/arm stuck in the gun for at least 6 hours while medial people were shooting him up with painkillers. They had no clue how to get him it without amputating his hand. They ended up taking the gun out of the aircraft. Understand? This is a big peeping gun. Like the size of one of the old VW Bugs. They took the gun apart as much as they could and medevaced him out with this gearbox that had to weigh 200 pounds on his hand. I saw this guy about 6 months later, just before I transferred to another base. He had this giant bandage on his hand with 4 fingers and a thumb sticking out of it. Not sure how well everything worked, but he did have his fingers. Saw a guy run over by an 18-wheeler. Turned his head into red clay with a perfect tire track mark straight across. Grabbed my son the split second we were hit by a speeding car when he got off of his school bus. Had I not taken all impact, he'd be dead. He has a TB from hitting the ground though. He lost adult teeth, he was 10. And road rash. I had to stumble and crawl to him breathless while a bus full of school children were screaming, having witnessed it. He's alive and thriving. This was DEC 2021. I found my best friend with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He put a blanket over his head and used trash bags as basically a tarp. His mom called me and was very concerned about how he was talking recently. Nothing suicidal, just different from how he would normally talk with her. He begged her to stay home from school a couple days after his mom called me. She told him he has to go, but she leaves for work before he goes to school. So he lied and was saying he was at school. The mom got a call from the apartment next to her asking what Alex is doing walking by the highway. She then called me to ask if he was at school. I said no, he wasn't in first or second hour. She started freaking out and was pleading for someone to go check on him. She works hours away from the apartment. My school was only 15 to 20 minutes away from the apartment. Not once ever did I think he was depressed or suicidal, nor did he ever have a bad day, it seemed like. Always making people laugh and could hold a conversation like no other. I learned that day you never know what demons people are facing. I have a key to the apartment, so I unlocked the door and walk in, and I proceeded to say an inside joke as a way to announce myself. I walked right past the living room and went to his room, and he was not in the room. Went downstairs where he hangs out. Wasn't down there. Peeked my head around the wall to do a quick check in the living room because that is the last place he ever goes. When I walked past earlier, I thought the plastic trash bags were a sheet. I only caught it out the corner of my eye walking up the stairs to his room. The amount of blood and brain matter that was on his lap is something I can never get out of my head. As well with the phone call with his mom letting her know. Hearing a mother's loss is the most primal, animalistic scream you will ever hear. When I was 13, I went with my friend to his house to find his sister's body hanging from a ceiling fan. The two guys welded to a pole. The supply voltage to the overhead wires on the Melbourne, Australia metropolitan train system is 1500 VDC. God knows how many amps. Of Peepton. Anyway. DC current grabs and holds. They tried to steal the copper. They failed. The current has grabbed them and boiled them dry. All the visceral fluids were gone. When I was 22 on Nye, I ended up in the hospital for alcohol poisoning. In the bed next to me was a 16-year-old kid for the same thing. His friends were scared to call for help when he collapsed, so he wasn't transported until hours later when his older brother came home. His BAC was slightly lower than mine was 382. So I don't really know how I came out okay, but he was brain dead. Listened to his parents discuss organ donation before he was taken off life support. Saw someone hit a guardrail on the interstate going 90 miles per hour. It ripped the door right off, and the look of shock on her face when I caught up matched mine. I once saw a woman who was stuck with her arm in a hydraulic press. It came out all flat, and I cannot delete this image from my mind. Arm was removed from her body after surgery. She should have just blown into her thumb. Saw an intellectually disabled diabetic woman with maggots in her scalp that had actually burrowed into the skull. On the same woman, I had to douse her head in turpentine oil and pull out dead/immobilized maggots with forceps. It took me an hour and a half of tolerating the smell of turpentine, pus and necrotic flesh. I was the captain of a snowboard team and we were practicing backflips. An 18-year-old skier rode up and asked whether he could practice with us. He landed on his head. I was first to him and asked him whether he could feel his legs. He said yeah. In the time between then and when ski patrol showed up with a sled, he had lost feeling in his legs. Seeing someone that young realize they were paralyzed was heartbreaking. He quickly went into shock. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit like. If you would like to see more, feel free to subscribe.